right, hey guys. Now that I've been standing in front of you for like 10 minutes, not saying anything. So first of all, thank you so much for coming to my talk on usability research. It thrills me that this is becoming something that's talked about more often in the context of crypto tools and surveillance circumvention tools and everything else. It's something that we need so badly. I think of the tools that I use on a daily basis, like PGP, which I, even as someone who has a background in development, had to actually be taught how to use it because I was just sort of staring at my screen blankly and blinking and not really understanding how to go about getting myself set up with a key pair and getting an email sent out that's encrypted, and that type of thing, where it's just the average user is having a really tough time adapting to that type of technology. And especially with crypto tools and surveillance circumvention tools in general, when your average user is not only just an average user of technology, but also someone who might be in a situation where their lives are at stake. There's a lot at stake for them. Being able to use these tools quickly and easily and be able to immediately open up a program, understand how to use it, and teach themselves how to use it instead of having to be taught is super valuable. I'd also like to thank Edward Snowden for giving props to usability today in his talk. That was pretty sweet. I was totally geeking out about that. I thought it would be pretty useful to explain user experience first. So I've always sort of had this working definition of user experience as how a person feels when they're interacting with something. That's anything. It could be in the digital space. It can be something physical. And if that's user experience, and user experience design is sort of shaping the experience around data about those users to make that experience valuable to them and enjoyable and something that they want to use. So at the crux of that really is getting to know your users very, very well in order to serve up that technology that they're going to like to use and want to use and keep using. I've always sort of described usability research as like dating because it's basically the same thing. To break down dating in a way that is totally robotic. You meet someone that you like, and then you go on a couple of dates with them. You're asking questions. You're gathering data to make sure they're a good match. That's basically the same thing that you're doing with usability research. Except hopefully less awkward. We talk about Alice and Bob a lot. And we use them as sort of a paradigm to explain how crypto tools work to the average user. But we also have to remember that Alice and Bob themselves have no clue what the fuck's going on. They're not super clear on how to encrypt things or how to, set up a proxy or whatever. They have no idea what's happening. They just know that they would need to talk to each other, and they don't want Eve or Mallory in the situation either. So, but the most important thing with these types of tools is that Bob and Alice can also be a source and a journalist, where the source could get into serious trouble if their identity is revealed, if they want to do it in a way, if they want to pass on documents, blow a whistle in a way that's secure and keeps their identity safe, so that they know that the information that they want to get out to the public is just getting out there without them being in danger. And the journalist, on the other hand, needs to protect that source, and we need to realize that these average users might have a lot at stake here. It's the same thing with activists in countries that are in crisis. If there's political uprisings, that type of thing, where they want to mobilize and others can help, but they really don't need any government intervention reading their messages between each other. Again, this is why we need to make tools that are not only effective and developed really, really well, but also have a front end that people understand how to use immediately. So that sort of, this is going to probably be preaching to the choir to a lot of people here, but I just thought it would be important to bring up the difference between quantitative and qualitative research, right? So if you have quantitative research, it's obviously incredibly valuable. You get lots of data. It's a really great way to measure overall behaviors, to get a baseline of your users, to sort of understand them at their very core, because you have such a large sampling. The downsides, though, of quantitative research is that it can be a logistical nightmare getting that stuff set up. I mean, I've had issues with it before where it's awful and it's expensive. The questions are very rigid. And hey guys. The questions tend to be very rigid because you're not really getting written responses in most cases. You just want the cold hard data of yes or no questions or multiple choices, and you can't really do much else with it, but it obviously is valuable for a handful of reasons. It also sort of kind of makes you a little bit more like the NSA because it's sort of just blanket, lots and lots of data. We'll do something with it later. But obviously, quantitative is really important at the beginning of a project, but qualitative, I feel like, especially in this context, oftentimes gets ignored. And the great thing about qualitative research is that it's detailed. It's very, very flexible, meaning that you can have very broad focus and use it as a way to sort of find the next point of your project, steer it in a way, help it steer you in a way that you weren't expecting to go. It's easy to arrange, and it's overall just you get this really great, juicy, meaty data out of it because you're talking to actual users one-on-one in a way that's very personal, and you can really delve as deep into it as you see fit. And that's why I sort of am sitting here preaching the benefits of qualitative research, and that's why I think this Guerrilla-style user interviews, yay, are the most valuable form of qualitative research because it's so easy to do, and anyone can do it who's involved in a project. They're absolutely magical, just like the unicorn that rode across the screen on a motorcycle. This is also, unfortunately, about as rare as that for crypto tools. So I'm hoping that sort of giving you this toolkit to use will help sort of push usability even more in this context. So I know that this can be really overwhelming because you're going out and you're trying to find people that are willing to sit down with you for a while and look at your app or look at your software and play with it, and you don't know what to ask, and you don't know how long the interview should be, and it's very overwhelming. The first couple of times that I went out on user interviews, I was a mess, and I was asking stupid questions, and I was shaking, and it was awful. But if you make yourself do it once or twice, you get in the swing of things, and you can get 5 or 6 really great user interviews done in like an average workday. And if you do that, twice a week, just are always going out and asking users what they think of your product, you're going to get really, really valuable feedback on it. But there are a lot of things that you have to consider before you're going into these situations where you're talking directly to your users. But thankfully, it's not as daunting as it may look. So first, to prepare yourself for this, you need to do 2 very important things. You need to establish your priorities and determine what you actually need for your project, or for actually going out on the user interview. So for establishing priorities, the reason you want to do that instead of just going out and winging it, which is sometimes actually fine, but most times you want to establish priorities in order to get really good and relevant data to a very specific problem that you're trying to solve. And there's also, I feel like there's this point where data can reach a critical mass, and you don't want like a data black hole where it's just sucking everyone in and everything's terrible. I hope there's no like physicists in here, because I don't know if that's analogous and all, but the thing is when it reaches that critical mass and you have so much data, it can block progress. And if you take the time to prioritize before you go out and research, it really does help to sort of pare it down and make sure that you get the data that's the most relevant to you at that time. So there are a couple ways of going about doing this. I know that sort of establishing priorities can lead to sort of political battles between teams and that type of thing, but there's one sort of tool that I use a lot that's called KJ analysis that I encourage everyone to look up. It's super valuable. It's very helpful. Everyone involved in the project, whether it be a stakeholder or a developer or a designer, anyone in the project can be involved in the KJ analysis process. Basically what happens there is that you make sure that you can have a focus question. It can be as broad as what are our users' goals. After you have that focus question, you have everyone who's involved in a room write down their opinions on that matter, one per Post-it note. Write down Post-it notes, one per Post-it note. Stick it up on a whiteboard and then organize it into categories of like answers. The category that has the most, that's your priority. And it's a totally democratic process and nobody's arguing. It's like clean cut right there. That's what we have to focus on. So I've always found that to be a nice, quick, easy way to get through that type of process and just keep this thing moving. So that being said, determining what's needed is obviously, for actually going out into the field is really important. And I want to stress that when you're going out, you don't need to have a released version of whatever your software might be. You don't need something that's fully functional. It's absolutely 100% fine to go out with a prototype of any fidelity. I've gone out with paper prototypes where I'm literally cutting out things that look like buttons in an app and slapping it down the table and moving it around as the user actually taps on things, and that is just as valuable as taking out something that's already been released. Now getting into the good stuff is writing screening questions. Screening questions are valuable for a couple of reasons. So first of all, good screening questions will help you determine if the user that you're going up to, this is sort of the Guerrilla style approach where you just sort of ambush somebody, say, hey, do you want to use my app for a minute? And you want to be able to screen them first to make sure that they're actually someone that's worth testing the product. Nothing against them, but if they're, a technologist, maybe you move on to someone who's not as familiar with, things much past the internet, and use them instead as sort of your litmus. Then again, sometimes it's also valuable to have somebody who's an expert in something test it, but that's up to you. It totally depends on your priorities and what you need for the project. I've also found that they're really great for serving as a record of demographics. So as you're screening and you're saying, what do you do for a living and blah, 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 then you can also ask for age ranges and gender, that type of thing, so that you get a little bit more of a broader picture of what that user looks like. And that can help in the end when you're doing your analysis to see sort of what users had difficulties with some things and didn't with others, and you can sort of compare to see where that issue might be coming from. So You also want to be asking and writing really broad and open questions before you go out. Open questions being things like, what are your main concerns with regards to privacy? Or what steps have you taken to protect your identity online? Instead of saying, hey, do you use PGP? Like, no. Okay, that was a nice answer. And then it gets awkward, and there's awkward silences, and everyone's uncomfortable. So asking open questions sort of allows that participant to go on, and you get that really great data, and you're writing down and everything that they're saying. And what specifically in this context of cryptography tools and surveillance circumvention technology, threat modeling is a really great way to sort of start framing these questions. And that way you also get to have sort of that second level of screening. You understand more if they're actually someone who's going to be using a product like yours. And also just a little side note that asking leading questions sucks. You're going to sabotage your research if you do that. So it's basically putting words into your users' mouths. Instead of saying something like, do you have trouble using PGP? It's asking something more like, tell me about your experiences with PGP. So that, again, you're opening the door for oh, that's nice. Hold, please. There we go. So you're opening the door for a more in-depth answer from them rather than just yes or no, or sort of they feel like they should be saying yes because you're a tech person and they don't want to look dumb, that type of thing. So leading questions really are terrible and should be avoided at all costs. They'll also skew your data. It'll totally fuck up your data set, and that's not good for anyone. So you also want to be writing task-based prompts. This I find to be very important. So when you're, let's say you have an iOS app, and you're going in with your own iPhone or a test iPhone, I find that asking these task-based prompts to the participants gives you a chance to step back and really observe and see where they're fumbling and that type of thing. And an example of this would be, opening, let's say, LinPhone and saying, make a call, which I found in the past couple of days doing research here that's not a thing. No one knows how to do it. So it's really great to have that moment to see their body language and that type of thing, and see where their finger is sort of going across the screen trying to find things, and it's really great takeaways from that type of experience. Also practice before you go out. It helps sort of cut down the jitters, obviously, and you can rewrite your prompts and rewrite your questions and get input from people, and that way you know that you have something that's really solid before you go and actually try to get this data. So then you have to find people. I have found that coffee shops are absolute gold mines for people who want to look like they're working but actually are procrastinating and trying to find more ways to procrastinate. So that being said, go to coffee shops. It's great. Most people want to talk to you if you approach them in a way that's gentle and not startling. I've also found that if you are going to a coffee shop or any sort of environment like that, to ask to speak to a manager first and just say, hey, I'm doing something that has nothing to do with a competing coffee shop, and here are my questions, and are you cool with this? 9 out of 10 times, if not more, they'll say yes. And then you have pretty much free reign over everyone in the coffee shop who looks like they are distracted. And mind your dang manners when you're talking to them, because here's the thing with a lot of usability research is that it's so easy to get frustrated because this thing that you're making is become a part of you, and somebody's looking at it and they can't use it, and it's frustrating to watch that happen. But practice self-restraint and just make sure that you're not doing things like telling them where to tap or click, correcting them if they screw something up, that just let them go through it, let them do their thing. Because that's, again, how you're going to get that really great data of actually looking at the person use the app and seeing for yourself where they're fumbling. This is going back to that qual versus quantitative research. The quantitative stuff, you really can't get that personal experience with that, and you can especially with user interviews, because you're sitting right in front of them. So as long as you sort of practice good usability research etiquette, you're going to get a lot of really wonderful answers and great data from this type of thing. So do feel free, though, when I found a lot of times that when people are getting frustrated, they tend to comment on things like the visual design of the app or whatever you're showing them. And then they start to give you suggestions, and then they turn into the expert, and you're like, that's nice, thank you. So then that is something where you do have to find a nice way to sort of reel things back in and get the conversation back in the right direction. It will happen, it always does, where the user's like, I think if this button were blue, I would tap it. Thank you so much for that information. And how about this next step? In that same vein too, I also find it really great when you ask the user what they're expecting to see in the next step of whatever process they're in, because then you're understanding what their expectations are, and then can compare to what is actually in the app. Seeing those two things side by side, you're going to be able to bridge the gap as you get more and more responses. So the most important part is sort of going off of all of that is to just sit back, shut up for a little bit, take notes, and to just watch them as they're going through things. It is really important to start to read their body language. I can't tell you how valuable that is, because the more you pay attention to that, the better you'll get at asking follow-up questions once you're able to sort of pinpoint when they're uncomfortable, when there's a level of discomfort, when there's surprise or frustration. You can sort of go off on that. It's as simple as saying, oh, I saw your shoulders go up. Is this stressing you out? It is. Okay, tell me more about that. And then you get that whole other level of a response that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise from a written survey. So then analyzing. This is where things can get a little bit muddy, because qualitative research, obviously, they're hard numbers to go off of, and it's pretty cut and dry of how to analyze it. I go about analyzing user interview research in a handful of different ways. And you have to take a lot of what they're saying with a grain of salt, obviously, but sort of like what we were talking about before with the KJ analysis, if you're finding that a certain phrase or certain discomfort is happening at the exact same point in a process, as you're gathering more and more of that, and you see that 15 people said that they didn't understand how to get from step A to step B, then that's when you can really go off of that and write something up that is going to be valuable for the project. So the ways I go about this are I tend to do, even though they're a little passe now, I guess, word clouds. I feel are a great way to visualize this. If something like weird comes up 22 times, it's going to be giant as opposed to other words in that word cloud. And that's, again, how you can pinpoint where, certain, like, if your app is going in the right direction or the wrong direction, or if it's somewhat neutral. I always do a research write-up where it's just sort of long form, just going on and typing about exactly what the objectives of the research were, what problem we're trying to solve, and what next steps might be in order to solve that problem based on the research that you've gotten directly from your users. And then, of course, I wanted to just try to stay away from buzzwords, but I'm going to use one right now anyways. This allows you to iterate on your designs and everything else in the app in a really great way, because you're going off of things that have come straight from the user's mouths. And there's oftentimes been situations where I have been out in the field and gotten a lot of feedback on one specific thing and just gone, screw it, I have my laptop with me, let me just comp this up and see if I can get a better response out of this. So doing that type of iteration while you're on the field too is wonderful. And if that's something you're comfortable with, it can be on a napkin, it can be on your computer, however you want to do it. If that's something you're comfortable with, I would highly recommend doing it because then you're getting live, real-time feedback right there on the spot. That being said, iterating on the design after this process is also obviously a natural thing to do. It makes sense in the process here, once you've analyzed the research, to go back, work on it for another couple of days, and then go out again and hammer down on that for another couple of sessions. That way you're really getting just the best data possible, and you're constantly testing things that are being developed and redeveloped and getting, going through the cycle. And this is why this is something that anyone can do. You don't have to have amazing visual design skills. You don't have to have any design background to really be doing this type of thing, to be going out with the tool that you have developed and asking users to use it. That's why this is such a good tool to have in your arsenal when you're developing crypto tools, to go out and ask people constantly how it's going, so that you can have that data to iterate on the design and get the best possible product out there. So, huzzah, go forth and research. There's a couple of things here that I forgot to mention. First of all, if you decide to do this type of research at a coffee shop, there's been some questions about whether or not, incentivizing people is ethical or not. I think it's not an issue. If you were to go into a Starbucks and say, go up to the counter, buy 3 $5 gift cards, and then hand them to your users, it's like, hey, if you answer my 15-minute, survey question, then you'll be able, sorry, let me rewind there. You're making the coffee shop happy by letting people go and buy more coffee, and you're sitting there and they're not worried about you. They know what's going on, and the users are even more likely to say yes when they know that they're getting free stuff out of it. So I find it to be very valuable. I don't see any ethical weirdness in there unless you're specifically developing something for a competing coffee shop, which I don't think there's going to be any sort of crypto tools for Caribou Coffee coming out anytime soon. So think you're fine there. And even if you decide to incentivize like that, it's still such a cheaper process than going and getting a third-party usability research agency to come do it for you, or hiring someone who is specific to that, if you don't have the budget. Because I know oftentimes on projects that I've worked on where it's with nonprofits, you get a grant. The grant money is separated into different categories, and design is never, ever one of those things. So these are sort of ways you can get around that and sort of take it on yourself and make sure that you're getting the best data possible. So with that, I figured I'd leave about 15 minutes for any questions. If you have anything that you're working on, you're wondering how to test it, I'm happy to answer those questions.
What's the normal amount per one researcher? How many people can you approach? What is the match?
That's a great question. So I tend, if you're going out, oh, sorry. The question was how many people can an average like researcher go out and ask questions to? And I tend to stick to like 5 or 6 in like an average work day. So in like an 8-hour period, it gives you time to research, sort of go back, do any design tweaks that you feel like doing, or doing any sort of like other low fidelity prototyping, and then going on to your next person. It gives you sort of that gap in between then. It also gives you time to, I always do like a very quick 2-minute recording right into my phone of like, here's what happened in that last session, and here's what I learned, blah, blah, blah. That way you don't have to go through all of your notes if you don't have a whole lot of time for it. It's great that way, but I'd stick to 5 or 6. Even if you're doing 2 or 3, that's great. I mean, this can be done literally any time that anyone's in public and looks like they don't care if you come up and talk to them. So as much as you can do is great, but if you're getting tired, it's not worth it, because then you're just going to start slipping and the data's going to suck and everything else. So, yeah.
How do you pick who to approach?
What was that?
How do you pick who to approach?
The question is, how do you pick to approach? So there's a couple of things. One, read their body language. If they see you and then turn and put their headphones on and look like they're working, it's like, okay, I get it. It's sort of the same phenomenon of like walking into a retail store and being like, don't talk to me, I just want to look for something. Don't go for that. I tend to go for people who are doing things like, they don't look like they're typing a whole lot if they're, sitting down with their laptop, or they're just sort of staring into the middle distance, which there are a lot of people who will do that. So that type of person, you really have to be there and read their body language and everything. It's pretty clear when somebody doesn't want to talk to you, and then you don't bother. The good news is if somebody doesn't want to talk to you and they look approachable and you approach them, they'll tell you, no, I don't feel like talking, and then you just move along. There's been instances where I just have gone up to anyone. I don't really care. I'm on a time crunch. Do you want to talk to me? No? Okay, whatever. You just move on. Yeah, not very scientific, but that's how I do it.
Could you list some of the most common applications in your toolbox that you use? And the second part, do you have any advice or experience with working with younger demographics?
That's it. So, what was the first part of your question? I got 2 into the second part. So, most common applications I use in my toolbox for researching, a pen and a notepad, and perhaps I'll bring my laptop if I feel like it. This is very cheap. You don't need to buy a single thing. If you don't want to, you can go get a napkin. It's really anything that you'd like to use. That being said, there are a couple of apps out there that make life a little bit easier. There's a tool called UXPin. They make these toolkits that are really wonderful that have different Android phones and iOS devices stenciled out onto pages, and then they have these little sort of Post-it note sticky things that are it's the whole GUI, basically, the whole standard GUI. That you can just stick on there, and that way you don't even have to lift up a pencil, which is wonderful. You can just sort of stick things on a page and say, oh, you didn't like the button there, how about if I move it here? Does that make more sense? That's a really wonderful tool. It's a little bit pricey, but I've found that it's completely worth it. They also, along with that kit, have sort of a questionnaire that's all the things that you need to know before you're going into your project. It's things like user personas, like what's your target audience, that type of thing, that really helps you think through it before you go out into the field. That's a great tool. There's a handful of wonderful free apps like Pop, which is prototype on paper, where you sketch anything on a piece of paper, you open up your app, you take a picture of it, and then you can draw targets so that it's tappable and it feels more substantial and more realistic. Those are the 2 that I tend to gravitate to. There's a ton out there, but honestly, the best tools in your arsenal are going to be pad of paper and a pen.
Qualitative analysis research where you're doing like histograms of common phrases or issues people are having, and how you're using word clouds. Are there other statistical tools you can use, like Kaytee's analysis to sort of work with complaints and demographics and that sort of thing?
So you're asking if there's any other things like KJ analysis to sort of drive the research forward, or?
In the specific case, we're trying to identify like clusters of problems.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see what you're saying. So there's a couple of different techniques for that. Card sorting is something that's sort of in the more traditional information architecture toolbox, where similar to KJ analysis, you're writing things on note cards, user personas, that type of thing, and then categorizing it from there. So basically, let's say you're trying to figure out what the average threat model is for your user, getting together with your team and sort of going through that exercise yourself, writing these things down, and then this is the sorting part, the card sort, where you're putting it all down on the table and everyone has input on what's going into which category. That's usually used for more things more like layouts and like what the hierarchy of a page could be, but I've used it for things where we're trying to determine exactly who our user is, for example, and type of thing.
Okay, so you mentioned that you do a lot of your sampling at like coffee shops and stuff like that. But when you are looking at people in coffee shops and you said you target people who are like working or whatever in there, how do you avoid like locational based sample biasing with people who are already familiar with working? Obviously they're working on their laptops or whatever, versus someone who's say more blue collar and doesn't have quite as much experience with the computer or things like that.
That's a great point. So the question is, how do you avoid sort of this locational bias if you really need to be asking users who are more blue collar and aren't going to be on their laptop in a coffee shop? Where do you go? That is an excellent question. I have in the past, this also ties into your second question, which I forgot to answer, about other age groups. So if you're testing children or teenagers, that type of thing, it's a little less guerrilla at that point. You have to sort of do a little bit more planning. That being said, it's not anything that's too strenuous. I've done things in the case of children, like called up schools in a given area, which is, getting more to your point about locational bias, you have more of a wide range of options in that case, and setting something up that's a little bit more structured. If you're trying to go for more of a that sort of guerrilla thing where you're trying not to plan too much and just need to get out, finding a place in a location where you know that whatever demographic you're going for is going to be, there's always going to be some sort of gathering place anywhere you go in any community. I've actually, for something that I was testing a couple of years back, set up something with a church and did sort of like a like roundtable discussion type of thing. It ended up being more like a focus group, but still valuable. I've gone into bars. People are great in bars because they've had something to drink and they're like more willing to talk to you. And but then again, you can also get some sort of shitty data if someone's had a little bit too much. So take that with a grain of salt. But you can do this type of thing anywhere where people are gathering. It just obviously use some discretion if it's going to be something where you're going to have to get some level of permission before you just sort of walk in. But that's always something that's possible. Is again, most of the time, whether it's a single person that you're asking or it's an organization, if you just explain who you are, what you're trying to achieve, most of the time, overwhelming majority of the time, they're going to say, yeah, come on in, that's fine.
If you're working with like a multiple developer team, which developer what do you look for with the exact tester?
Well, it's less. It depends on how your sort of group is structured, how your working group is structured. In the past, when other people on my team, different teams I've worked on, have gone out and done their research, it's because they had a question about something and just wanted to go answer it. So it doesn't really matter in that context if they're, one type of developer versus another. If you're choosing somebody specifically to go out onto the field, first I'd find the person who's the most comfortable with that idea. That trumps anything. But again, it depends on the problem that you're trying to solve for that particular research session. So if it's something that is, having to do with the flow of something, going from point A to point B in a process, you might want someone who's more familiar with the sort of the umbrella overview of the app. Then again, if sort of the nitpicky, more like bug squasher comes along and sits and observes also, that's going to be also very valuable, because then they're going to understand sort of start to understand the difference between the usability bugs and the functionality bugs and how those are playing together, that type of thing. So again, depends, but I'm giving great answers. It does depend, but I would say that it's valuable for anyone involved in making a product to go out and test it. Because then that helps share the expertise of usability testing, usability research to everyone on the team. And then everyone's more familiar with what they need to be doing to make the product more usable for their end user. And it's also great to go out in teams too, so. Anything else?
I know you mentioned that in your toolbox, generally you take like pen and paper kind of thing, but with all of the additional technology that we've got now, things like Google Glass and stuff like that, where you can actually take feedback back for others to see it, what kind of legal privacy kind of issues do you get with getting permission for recording something like that?
So most of the time when I'm recording something, it's in a much more formal environment. It's like in a research lab. And then there are there are release forms that you have to sign. There have been times I've gone out with sort of like different rigs that'll work, or simply just recording on my laptop. And all you need is just a basic consent form. If they don't want to they don't want to show their face, you can cover up your camera very obviously. You can show them that you're doing it. And if they don't want their voice recorded, then you just deal with it that way and just take really, really good notes. But a lot of the time, recording is great, but I've also found that it's hard to go back to, because scrubbing through everything, you don't want to sit through a full user research session a lot of the times. That's why also I do that sort of 2-minute recording at the end. But in the case that you do want to sort of have a record of where everyone's tapping, that type of thing, you are going to want to get a release form signed. You are going to want to get consent while you're screening them. Do you have any problems with your face being shown on camera? Yes or no? Going through that type of thing so you know exactly what they're comfortable with and how to make those changes to make sure that they're the most comfortable when you're doing the test.
I think most of what you've been talking about applies equally to both hardware and software, but do you see any special challenges with going out and having the usability done with a hardware-focused device?
So the question is challenges with going out with actual hardware that you're testing. Most of the time, as far as being the researcher, all I'm doing is taking notes and that type of thing. But when you're actually, most of the time, you're bringing some other sort of device with you anyway to test on. If it's particularly unwieldy, then I would think that this type of research might be a little bit more difficult. But then again, if there's a certain part of that that you can easily replicate using lighter weight materials, that type of thing, to just have the basic interface on there and have the users go through it like that. It's sort of the same thing as having a paper prototype where it feels dumb, but I swear to God it works. You can still get the same valuable data from that if it's giant. There's that. If it's giant and unwieldy and that type of thing. If that is the case, then it's best to sort of try to set something up where you're recruiting users and bringing them in to test. So, anything else? No? All right. Oh, maybe. Can you repeat that?
Like you said that other people in the team can help to do research.
Oh, yeah.
Do they actually do it? And if they do,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the people who are really interested in finding out, doing research and finding out how to do it and becoming more involved in the usability process, they're, most of the time, really, they're fully into it. When you're bringing someone along with you, if you're going in teams of 2, I wouldn't go above 2, by the way, because then you're going to start to overwhelm people. But if you're going in teams of 2, that's also great because the person who's not so sure if they want to be involved or not can have that chance to sort of sit back and be the note taker and see how the process works. And at least then everyone's starting to get more familiar with the process. Great. Well, thank you so much.